and the governor defeated the president with lower to middle income voters. Those with higher incomes tended to vote for President Bush. Lots of history was made Tuesday night in congressional races. When the new Congress convenes in January, there will be more new faces entering this building than any other time in history. 86 new congressmen won election Tuesday. African Americans added 13 new members to the House for a total of 38, an all-time high. Women candidates won 19 new seats for a total of 47. Although they lost 9 seats to Republicans, the Democrats retained control of the House. One of the most dramatic gains from Tuesday's election is the number of women in the Senate. There will be 6 women in the Senate next year. Carol Moseley Braun of Illinois beat her Republican opponent by 10 points to become the first African-American woman senator.
If anything, I think the results of this election says very clearly to the country that the time for coming together is at hand. The time for coming together is now.
In another unique first, California is sending 2 women to the Senate. Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer defeated their Republican opponents Tuesday. The Democrats increased their majority in the Senate by 1. For President-elect Bill Clinton, Tuesday's election means Washington becomes what is known as a one-party town, meaning for the first time since 1976, there will be a Democratic president and Democratic majorities in the Senate and House of Representatives.
Bill Clinton issued his first foreign policy statement Wednesday, less than 24 hours after the American people elected him as their 42nd president. It was a pledge of continuity.
During the transition that is now beginning, I urge America's friends and foes alike to recognize, as I do, that America has only one president at a time, that America's foreign policy remains solely in his hands, that even as America's administrations change, America's fundamental interests do not.
Mr. Clinton won't be inaugurated until January, but he has assured world leaders their promise to maintain good relations with President Bush during the transition would be viewed as a gesture of goodwill toward the new administration. Conversely, he warned others not to doubt America's resolve during this period of transition. During his first 100 days in office, Bill Clinton is expected to concentrate on ways to get the nation's economy moving forward. But he will also be confronted with a number of foreign policy issues. The crises in Yugoslavia and Somalia will demand his attention, as will peace talks in the Middle East and U.S. relations with Russia. The president-elect is no stranger to diplomacy. He is a graduate of Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service in Washington, D.C. Hans Benedijk is director of Georgetown's Institute of International Diplomacy. He says Mr. Clinton's foreign policy style will follow that of other Democratic presidents.
Well, if you look back at a series of Democratic presidents, Woodrow Wilson, John F. Kennedy, and others, you find that they come in with strong ideals and approach the world in that way. And they're also much more engaging, if not interventionist.
But Benedijk expects Clinton will make some modifications.
But I think Bill Clinton will learn from some of the mistakes made by previous Democrats when they're in office. The early months of the Carter administration saw a series of fairly ideological pronouncements. And later on in the Carter administration, they lived to regret those pronouncements. So I think we will see some greater caution and a little more pragmatism, perhaps, from a Clinton administration.
It may be several weeks before the president-elect announces his key foreign policy advisors.
At the State Department in Washington Wednesday, spokesman Richard Boucher said no immediate changes in U.S. foreign policy are anticipated as a result of Tuesday's U.S. presidential election. Mr. Boucher said State Department officials will work closely with President-elect Bill Clinton's transition team. But he said all decisions will be made by those currently in office until the new president takes office in January.
The world doesn't stop turning. We still have a lot of things on our plate. There are people who need our help in Bosnia. There are people who need our help in Somalia. We have efforts underway to solve crises and problems in Angola. I'm sure there are probably a lot of other places I could name. They have the Middle East peace talks, which has been a very important thing for the United States. And we have people who are in charge and until January 20th still responsible for doing those things, for making the decisions and seeing that those things get done.
President-elect Clinton stressed the same point in remarks Wednesday afternoon from the governor's residence in Arkansas. Mr. Clinton said, even though the U.S. presidency is changing hands, the fundamental interests of the United States remain the same.
I want to reaffirm the essential continuity of American foreign policy.
The U.S. State Department reacted with concern Wednesday to reports that Croatian troops are blocking Bosnian refugees from entering the country. The refugees are fleeing the Serbian forces that captured parts of their country last week. State Department spokesman Richard Boucher.
We're encouraging Croatia to take in more people, more refugees. We recognize the sacrifices that they've made. They've got some 600,000 people there already. They're spending something like $6 million a month, and they have a budget deficit of $500 million a year or something like that. So there are strains that are placed on Croatia. At the same time, we're trying to help out with all these displaced people there. You saw yesterday that we also announced $21 million in new assistance for displaced persons and refugees in that area. And so we're doing whatever we can to help out with the situation.
Mr. Boucher added the United States is continuing with its plan for full diplomatic relations with Croatia.